Welcome to Difficult Conversation Africa broadcast. I present to you the host, Yinka Olaito.
Welcome to Difficult Conversation Africa podcast. My name is Yinka Olaito. As you know, this is the platform where we raise and step up conversation about difficult but essential conversation in Nigeria and across Africa. In today's episode, we will be looking at climate change in Africa. Is it a looming crisis? And as usual, I will always give you a background of the discussion before I introduce my guest. Climate change is hitting African environment very hard, and it is exposing Nigeria and African vulnerability to a lot of threat, which is threatening millions of people. We cannot continue to pretend that climate change is not an issue in Africa, as we can see drought, we can see rising sea level in the western coastal region of Africa. We can see a lot of effect in a prolonged drought and extreme weather heat. In some places, Africa has not been witnessing cyclone, but these are part of what we consider as climate change effect. And in Africa, 60% of income is from agriculture, and therefore, all this effect of climate change is affecting production. And it have been forecast. The forecast show that by 2050, 2 to 3% of African GDP may be erased because of that. But the issue is that in Nigeria and Africa, we still continue to deceive ourselves and say it's not an African thing. Yes, we already agree that coastal areas like part of West Africa are going through a lot now, and the rising sea level, especially in some part of coastal area, particularly in Lagos and some other areas, the flood that we witness, these are effect of climate change impact, but we continue to say that it's not an African thing. Some of the things that could have helped to reduce this, adequate funding, we're not doing it as much as we are. And today, in this episode, I have a guest expert who will help us to discuss this and share more light or insights about this effect, or whether Africa is playing with fire or just a time bomb. My guest today is Rinret. Rinret is climate change advocate, SDG 7 advocate, and she's a project manager in a frontline organization. She had been selected as part of 12 people across Africa to attend and discuss climate issue that is affecting Africa at international level. And she is here to share with me her experience. Welcome, Rinret, to the program.
Thank you so much. I'm happy to be here, and I'm honored to be on your platform.
Thank you for honoring our invitation. So, based on the background that I've shared, I'll just go to question one. Why is climate change conversation so important now?
Okay. Thank you so much for that question. So for me, I would say that this conversation of climate change is very important now, because despite Africa's small contributions to global CO2 emissions, which is about 4%, we can see that climate change represents a major threat to Africa achieving its SDG goals by 2030. And we can also see that the negative impact of climate change, which you've mentioned a few, increased temperature, which leads to heat stress, extreme weather events like flooding and drought, they are felt most drastically in African countries. And these extreme events have threatened food security, affected human health, displaced communities, and damaged the ecosystems in Africa. And according to UNECA, 17 out of 20 countries that are most vulnerable and threatened by climate change are in Africa. So Africa does not have access to the same resources, technology, infrastructure to combat climate change and achieve its net zero targets. So what Africa needs now, Africa needs a fearless, inclusive, open debate and dialogue with global experts to help them achieve their climate ambitions. So I would say that this conversation is very, very important now for Africa because of these reasons. Thank you.
Thank you, Rinret. You mentioned something that almost everybody knows about. Africa is contributing only 4% to the climate change effect, but we seem to be having um, some of the major impact of it. Why is this so? I'm sure that you've mentioned it, but I just need you to reemphasize.
Yes. So the thing is that Africa contributes the least because, first of all, we know that we are an underdeveloped continent. So because
Okay.
industrialization and development brings about emission of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. So yes, and unfortunately, due to the location of Africa, we are just the most affected, unfortunately. So I mean, that's just the case.
Yeah, everybody have been saying that climate change should not be a concern. Poverty, hunger, and all other pressing issues should be a concern of the concern of Nigeria and Africa at large. Are we actually living in denial? That's number one. Because food security that you have mentioned, a climate change is threatening that. So if we say that it's not, the question then is, are Africans living in denial of a possible and emerging crisis, or they are just pretending that that's not an issue?
Okay, thank you so much for that question. I wouldn't say Africa is in denial. Rather, what I would say is that Africa is at that critical crossroad where they are caught between a tough dilemma of should we accelerate our development or should we commit to sustainability? So if you can see, Africa has shown commitment and dedication to tackle climate action because we have comprehensive legal frameworks, we have policies and regulations. However, the question now is how can Africa turn these frameworks into real impact? Because remember, we have the challenge of finance, we have the challenge of infrastructure, we
Hmm.
also have the challenge of capacity. So, in essence, I would say in Africa, it's not a question of denial, but rather what Africans are most concerned about is access to electricity and development. So they are more concerned access to electricity and development rather than to say they are more concerned about climate change. So what we can now do is access to energy can offer a solution because energy plays a fundamental role in Africa's development pathway. So it is important that we now promote access to electricity using cleaner fuels as a tool to tackle climate action. So that's what Africa needs to do. So I wouldn't say Africa is in denial at all of the effects of climate change.
But like Yoruba will say that if you have several trouble, you start from the one that you can handle. Is that mean what you are saying? That's the case. It's not a case that we're living in denial, right?
No, it's
That
not.
African that Africa is faced with many trouble. That climate change issue look like a faraway one than the pressing one. I think that is. But it might look like a time bomb for us if we continue to put if we continue to neglect and postpone. And that's why this conversation is really important now. That's why we call it difficult conversation. You cannot continue to overlook a looming crisis just because of the different challenges that we have. Anyway, there's other thing that comes to my mind. Statistics show that Africa contribute less than 4% to global greenhouse gas emission, but suffers disproportionately due to limited adaptive capacity, weak infrastructure, poverty. What do you think Africa can now do? We are contributing less, like less than 4%. That's statistic, but we have weak capacity to respond to the impact that the issues are raising.
Okay, thank you so much for that question. So if you look at Africa, across the continent, you would agree with me that the level of human and economic development it differs across different regions, right? So climate change
Mm.
provides opportunities for Africa to harness its huge resource potential, and addressing climate change will create a significant market opportunity across the continent. So this is an opportunity I would say that Africa needs to look inwards find its own unique solutions, right? By learning from best practices and creating new approaches. Now, I know this is not a conversation everybody wants to have, but it's the reality of Africa. For me, I would say in the short to medium term, Africa needs natural gas. Yes. So
Mm.
natural gas, because yes, I know it's a fossil fuel, but it's a cleaner version of a fossil fuel because it
Mm.
needs what natural gas will do for Africa is to provide a base load power for development because Africa does not have the generation and transmission infrastructure in place to have 100% renewable. So what natural gas is going to do is just to provide that base load power. So remember why I say natural gas is because, I mean, literature has shown that Africa holds around 7% of the world's natural gas reserves. And then also the Africa Energy Outlook of 2022 also suggests that even if Africa explores its gas reserves for the next 3 decades, if you put together whatever CO2 we're going to emit, it's going to be approximately around 10 gigawatts, which would not even add to
Mm.
more than 3.5% of what we are already emitting. So natural gas is a necessity
Mm.
for Africa to bridge, that energy transition, and it will help to unlock opportunities, productivity, economic development, job creation, and to help Africa to realize its SDG goals. So what natural gas is doing for Africa is to present that middle ground, for an equitable, just transition for Africa to support large-scale
Copy countries.
industrialization and then to bridge the poverty gap. So it's important for Africa right now to explore innovative strategies while using natural gas to make sure that, it's decarbonizing and then using different strategies and technologies to make sure that, it's finding that balance between development and sustainability while transitioning. So that's what I think Africa
Thank
needs.
you. And once again, thank you for providing such an holistic view to the conversation. Now, let's talk about gas. You just mentioned gas and talk about let's talk about gas emission. Gas flaring is a concern in Nigeria and some other countries. Um, the IPC project that's projected by 2020 climate change could reduce Africa GDP by 2020 annually and push it to 1 million people and push 1 million into poverty. What will you what will be your take on that, on the gas emission and gas flaring issue and its impact in reducing um, um, productivity in Africa as well as forcing 1 million people into poverty?
Okay, thank you so much for that question. So, yes, I totally agree with you. Gas flaring is a huge environmental issue for us because we're wasting this gas that has the potential to generate electricity, in sub-Saharan Africa and like Nigeria, as you've mentioned. So, if you look at Nigeria, the gas that is being flared in Nigeria, data has shown that it has potential to produce around, let's say, 1 gigawatt of electricity for Nigeria. And of course, we all know that Nigeria is one heavy culprit of gas flaring, which we are now losing money. It's not just about losing the gas, but we're losing money around $2.5
Mm.
billion yearly. So it's not just
Wow.
about the gas, it's also the money that we're losing. So if you imagine this money, if we convert it and re-inject it into the economy, just imagine the potential of jobs that is going to create. Imagine the adaptative measures that we can begin to adopt, the technologies that we can unlock. So and then looking at Nigeria, as you may say, it will shock you that only 40% of our gas is being utilized. 30% is fled, and the other 30%,
Wow.
we send it to reservoirs because we do not have the infrastructure, we don't have the technology, to re-channel the gas that is being fled. So my take will be that what we can now do is, there's research, there's literature that has shown that fled gas, can be explored, can be used to produce cheap hydrogen, which is another form of energy, a form of clean energy, and to generate energy when we can use, hydrogen fuel cells, solid oxide fuel cells. So these are technologies that I think that, with research and development, with funding, we can begin to look at this type of options to rechannel that 30% of gas that is being fled, the money we're losing, to invest into technology so that we can curb, the future, we can curb the poverty that is ahead of us. 2050, just the way we say 2030, now where's 2030? We're halfway to 2030. The same way with 2050, is it when we get to 2040, we begin to
Exactly.
move around helter skelter? This is something we can begin to plan ahead, with proper planning and proper leadership.
I like the point you raise about we are not just losing gas, we are wasting money. Why I see why has it been difficult for us to be able to maximize opportunity we have in Nigeria and Africa? Why has it been so difficult? Do we lack the technical know-how or the infrastructure or proper planning or policy?
Okay, so I wouldn't say it's policy. Policy is out of it. Nigeria, honestly, if you're in the sector, you would agree with me that policy wants to kill us. We have too many policies. Honestly, like there's this policy,
No,
there's
everywhere, everywhere, everywhere. We are very good at documentation. It's
exactly.
implementation that we have problem.
You've just nailed it. So for me, it's an issue of leadership. Because when you have clear path leadership, let me use the UK for instance. The UK said they will shut down all their coal plants by 2025. But it will shock you that the last coal plant was shut down last year in 2024. Why
Wow.
was that? Because of leadership. When leaders come together to say, look, this is a roadmap. This is what we want for Nigeria, right? What is the issue? Is it infrastructure? Is it capacity? Is it lack of local workforce? Then they begin to, we have internal budget, we have our national budget, is to prioritize. So I think Nigeria's problem is lack of prioritizing what is important for the nation. So, but you need a leadership to say, this is what we need. This is where we're going to. This is where we need to be by 2030. What measures do we need to put in place? How can we begin to implement? We have young people, around. We have innovations. How can we fund these innovations, to take Nigeria to where it needs to be by this time? So it's leadership for me, I would say, and lack of implementation strategy.
Yeah, thank you once again for sharing your thoughts. Other thing that is of concern to me is adaptation effort, such as drought resistance, crop early warning system, and renewable energy project are way underfunded. And I think this is what we can do in terms of adaptation method to apply this, to go through this adaptation, because it's not a rocket science. I think it is within the reach that we should be able to do. Why is this so? And what are your thoughts, and what are the possible advice and solution you will have to speak to this?
Okay, thank you so much for that question. So, like you've mentioned, funding, because as you can see, if you see the cost of adapting to climate change across Africa could reach $50 billion per year by 2050. Who will give
Wow.
Africa the money? That's a very big question. Who is going to give Africa the money? So, but again, Africa needs to know that help is not coming from anywhere. Help is
Wow,
not coming
exactly.
from anywhere. That's the Africa needs to realize that
To
help is
wake
not
up
coming from
now.
anywhere. So we need to wake up and know that we are our own solution. You are the solution to your own problem. Help is not coming from America. Help is not coming from Europe. No, it's not. It's going to come from within Africa. And then for me, I envision the long-term impact, of course, will be the threat to food security, because our population has been projected to reach, is going to reach 2.5 billion people by 2050. Who is going to feed that population? Who is going to address the poverty that is encroaching? Who is going to affect the impact? Who is going to address the impact, the negative impact of the climate change that is coming? So, but again, you mentioned something earlier that Africa agriculture is one thing that we are good at, because it employs more than half of Africa's workforce, and the smallholder farmers contribute 60% of the population in the low income African countries. So what we can now do, because of course, but the challenge, of course, is the smallholder farmers, most of the farming practices they do is mostly rain fed. So we can now
Yeah.
begin to leverage on technology, leverage on clean technology, renewable energy, and begin to adapt to see how these most affected, communities or areas can begin to implement, drought resistant crops, to begin to create awareness, because that is one thing again we lack. People don't know that these technologies exist. They don't know that there are climate smart agricultural practices that they can begin to, adopt, that can give them, to achieve resilience. So, I mean, digital solutions, AI, how can Africa now leverage and begin to integrate this into agricultural practices? So it's very important that awareness is key. Climate resilient education, for me, I would say, is the first step in fighting climate change.
Wow. That's really thoughtful. Part of the challenges that Africa and Nigeria will face, if climate situation really come to play, conflict, displacement, and many more. In fact, we have seen that in Nigeria, maybe in the last few years when there was flood in Benue, all of them. People couldn't access their house. There were a lot of displacement and all of that. These are some of the challenges that we are overlooking because it appears that it's just once in a year. What if it becomes a regular occurrence? So, what should we begin to do now to prepare in advance? Because what we are just seeing now is just child play compared to what can happen if the effect of compared to what can happen. Interestingly, our emergency responses is still not at the top notch in Nigeria. It is when the crisis starts that you find that our National Emergency Management Agency will be running around. And in particular, look at when it happened in Benue and Co. There was flood everywhere. They could not even access them. That was when we started going around to go and get food quickly. Get food to who? Somebody was sitting on the top of their roof. How do you get stuff to them? So how do we begin to plan for this? Because when the situation really start, we are not sure that we are prepared. What will be your take on this? How do we prepare? How do we not wait until the crisis start before we start pushing around and running around?
Yes, I totally agree with you. It's not when it happens we begin to move helter skelter. So, but again, back to the issue of finance, climate, to support climate adaptation and mitigation measures. I mean, Africa needs money to do that, but for Africa to withstand these challenges, like I mentioned, Africa must leverage technology in education, must leverage technology in agriculture, healthcare, sanitation, youth empowerment, capacity building, in every area, in every sector, because it works interchangeably. Another thing Africa can do to withstand this is awareness. I cannot emphasize the need awareness, because when people know, when you know something is coming, then you're able to arrange yourself. They say to prepare for a good Sunday, you start preparation from Friday. So when people know, so when people know that something is coming, I can now, it's just like with money. For instance, you want to buy a car, you know how much the car costs, right? You begin to save ahead of time. So the same thing with, climate change and the negative impact. If I know that, oh, by June this type of rain will fall, what can I begin to do? Can I now reinforce? Can I have like better drainage? Can I clear my drainage and make better waterway? So these are the little things that we need to begin to do. And implementation, literacy campaigns, training for local people, and especially women and youth. We have to build that local workforce. Investment in education and skills, technology infrastructure. This will now unlock economic opportunities for Africa to withstand this impact. But what Africa really needs is not just, Africa will need adequate finance, financial support, technical support, capacity building support. If not, it's just going to be the same cycle. Big pledges, huge funds, grand plans, but no concrete action on ground to follow through. So we need that financial support. That's the truth. But how can we look inwards, to support ourselves, to help to withstand this negative impact?
Yeah, I like some of the points you raised about awareness and all of them. And because of our time, this will be probably the last question I will ask. And then if opportunity comes, we can take you up on a part two of this. In terms of awareness, media has a role to play. Media must help to actually step up this conversation in advance, especially, so that the government do know, the policymakers can know, should know what to do. They should hold accountable policymakers and everyone that is expected to do something. Are you sure that the media is doing enough to raise this awareness, or is it that funding is the issue, or decision makers or policymakers are the ones that are actually pretending not to hear what the media is saying?
Okay. I like that part when you said the policymakers are pretending not to hear. So, well, personally, I would say that, I mean, let me use your platform, for instance. You're already doing a great job. I would just
Thank you.
applaud you for that. Because this is a great platform. Like, I love what you're doing. This is one platform. You're
Thank
creating
you.
awareness. You're educating people. You're telling people this is it. You're raising topics that people are shying away from. People don't want to face it and have that discussion. So, media for me is a strong tool. In the past, I would say that Africa has suffered from negative narratives. That's what Africa has suffered from, because there's power in great storytelling, and for Africa, it's very crucial that, we emphasize the need to allow the continent to approach its climate action targets based on its unique context, based on its
Okay.
resources, based on its strategies, its solutions, and capacities. Africa should not be held to the same standards to meet, identical decarbonization targets, as the same with US, the same with other people that are the major emitters. It's not fair to Africa. So what's Africa, the perspective now that the media needs to project for Africa is that Africa should be showcased, by media as the new narrative is that Africa is ready. Africa has the capacity to lead its own climate action and energy transition. Not that, oh, we're here, oh, we're waiting for help, come and meet me. No, Africa has that youth. We have that number. I mean, our population, we have a large population of young people. We have opportunity. So the story for Africa, the media needs to communicate clearly the new African story, which is that Africa is a continent of opportunity. Africa is abundant, not only in natural resources, but in human capital, in innovation, in creativity, in ambition. We know what we are doing. All we just need is, that little nudge, that little help, financial help, access to technology, access to build our workforce. If you give us that, I'm telling you that, just give us the next 10 years. You'll be shocked and surprised where Africa will be. So the leadership, the policy makers, yes, they are closing their ear and pretending like, due to corruption, due to selfish gains, I would say, they don't want to face and say, oh, this is it. But I mean, look at young African leaders coming up. Look at Burkina Faso. Sorry, look at what he's doing. After he cut off those outsiders, see, they've made from their gold reserves, they've made, I think, 18 million or billion dollars out of the $1 $1 billion that they're giving them every year. Yeah, every month or something. So you can see that Africa wants to come up. They've been cheating us for years. We have capacity. We just have not
Rinret,
realized that we have that capacity.
Rinret, I like your level of optimism And I like the one, the what you shared, that media must begin to project Africa as the new bride with the capacity to produce the right child, whether male or female child, that the world need now. I'm just using that just as a but the problem is, as much as the media would try, if our leaders goes to international meeting with cap in hand, we media now report that that is not what we are. And I think that it all boils down to leadership again. And I think it, because they are the what we call brand ambassadors of the nations, of the continent. There's little you can do if your brand ambassador is um is changing the game while you are playing the game to this place. But all the same, I'm optimistic, like people like you, young people like you, intelligence and contributing, and so optimistic. I like the part you are closing with, that Africa has what it takes. And I'm happy that people like you, young people like you, and that are doing real work in that area. I hope that we can get a critical mass of people like you and many other young people who says that Africa can handle its own. And I like what you also said. You mentioned that it's also important for Africa to develop its own grown solution to climate change issues, not the Western solution that may not be applicable. In fact, when we develop a homegrown application, it may be cost effective than what we think. Where there's a will, there's always a will. On that note, Rinret Best, thank you for coming to this platform. Thank you for the insight you have shared. Thank you for being such a wonderful and knowledgeable person. I'm so happy, and I'm rooting for you. I'm clapping for you for the kind of energy that you have brought to the conversation. And I hope that one of those days we will have you back. Thank you once again for coming up. Okay, to our listener, thank you for listening. I'm sure that this conversation is really, really essential, and we must continue this conversation. Hopefully, we have a part 2 of it where we can talk about sustainability and funding issues that are required. Like we will always say, please don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow us on LinkedIn, Instagram, and all the platforms. And if there are issues that you don't want to discuss, you can send us email through info@difficultconversationafrica.org. Thank you, and see you in the next episode.
Thank you for listening to this episode. For inquiry, please send an email to info@difficultconversationafrica.org. Telephone 0809 591. Please follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Difficult Conversation Africa. See you soon.